Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're gonna make some industrial techno sound that sound like this. Alright, so there is different way to get this kind of industrial sound. The best way to use it is usually using FM modulation, but you can also use detuning, slightly detuning one oscillator to another can create a weird tone. One great way as well is to use amp saturation, having a basic waveform, but then you had a lot of distortion, which is making interesting. And I decided to create an instrument rack which gather all of this function. And as usual, we're gonna have a look into the rack, build the rack from scratch, and then I will explain you each macro, what everyone does what, give you some tips as well along the way. And as usual, the rack is available for free, the link in the description. It's available for Live 11, but I also made the Live 10 version with a little bit less macro and function. So let's start to create the rack from scratch. I'm gonna create a new track and I'm gonna load Ableton operator. So why operator? Because it goes 4 different oscillators that you can either do FM with, but you can do more some kind of classical synthesis, and you can do a bit of both. So that's what we're gonna do. And for that, we need to go in the algorithm section here and gonna use this little cube, which means that oscillator B is gonna modulate oscillator A and oscillator G is gonna modulate oscillator C. So like I say, I want a combination of both, so we're gonna use A and B to do some FM. So oscillator B is gonna modulate oscillator A, and with oscillator C, we're gonna do some bit of detuning, and I'm gonna deactivate the oscillator G that we don't need. This way you have oscillator A, you can hear, and with oscillator B, you can add some FM modulation. But what I can do is use oscillator C to add some slightly detuning, so I'm gonna put the fine at 50, just to slightly detune this oscillator compared to the A. As you can see here, these two are playing alongside, and then if I bring up, you can start to hear this kind of slight detune effect. It's quite subtle, but it's a great way to add a bit of character and excitement to your sound. So we're gonna start to create the rack, so Control G to group, and you have the macro here, and I'm gonna add 2 more macro here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna quickly rename everything. Alright, so first we're gonna focus on the FM. So here I have my oscillator B, which is modulating oscillator. FM basically is like you modulate an oscillator frequency with another oscillator, and you can adjust the amount of modulation and the frequency of the oscillator which is modulating to create some kind of weird tone. So the amount will be the level of oscillator B, because the more I bring up oscillator B, the more I get modulation on oscillator A. You can hear some harmonics, and then I'm gonna map as well the fine, so with FM fine and coarse. So this is basically it's gonna control the pitch of your modulator. That's already giving you this nice metallic sound. So then obviously you can really play with these 3 parameters to get different kind of tone. It's pretty wide how different type of sound you can get just with these 3 macro. Then what I've done is decide to be able to select the pitch of the oscillator 1, so the one which is receiving the modulation. And I'm gonna decide to put the fine on the tuning. So this way, even if you press the same note on your keyboard, on your push to, you can change the tuning. And I found out this is like kind of a linear way to pitch, rather than in your keyboard, it will jump from one semitone to another. So you can get some tone that you couldn't have with just classical keyboard. The great thing as well is, like I said, it's gonna be some detuning between oscillator A and oscillator C. So in order to do that, I'm gonna map the amount level of oscillator C to tone. And the point of this oscillator is just to slightly add some detune effect. And it's not gonna be very pronounced effect, but just enough to give a bit more character. I can show you now, but you will hear it better later with the effect. You can hear this kind of phasing vibrato effect, you can already hear a little bit, but I'll come back to it when I put the effect and you will hear it better. Something we can map as well is the waveform. So now it's by default on sine wave. Usually with FM, sine wave work well. I like to use triangle as well, but I decided to map the macro, so this way you can create also other type of sound. You don't need to use always effect. You don't need always to use FM, especially you will see with the saturation that we're gonna add later. Maybe if you have a clean saw without FM, sometimes it works better. So I'm gonna map this to waveform, and I need to map the C and A because they are the both oscillator that we hear, and so this way we can move around. So I'm gonna stay to triangle. And we're gonna map the cutoff, so I'm just gonna use the filter 12 dB because I don't want something too aggressive. I'm not gonna modulate the filter. I'm just gonna map the cutoff, and I keep it clean. The resonance around 20%. I don't want something too resonant, but I want to use the resonance just to accentuate a little bit the filter sweeping. And then there is one thing extra you can do. It's not mandatory, but you can put your synth in mono and then have some glide. So this way, between two notes, if you hold them, you can have this pitch modulation, which is nice. Now we're gonna talk about saturation, but before that I'm just gonna add the reverb. So just this way you can hear the effect better. So I use the hybrid reverb, and I'm just gonna use the algorithm with the dark hole. You can already map the amount of reverb. I usually don't go that much. I rest around 30%. Well, then you can tweak a little bit the way you want. The decay around 4 seconds, as it's gonna be kind of a lead or kind of industrial type of sound. You want to have this cavernous warehouse effect. So at least 4 seconds. Obviously you can reduce, it's up to you. Bring up the size, obviously, to get this bigger effect. Damping is gonna reduce the very high frequency, so it's perfect to crank it up. So like this is really reduce the high frequency, especially with this type of metallic sound, which is gonna be a lot of noisy high frequency. A bit of damping doesn't hurt. And same the shape. Again, it's a matter of taste. Bass mix there, and I'm just gonna put the bass in mono and the stereo 120 just to be safe. And you can EQ as well your signal, which I will recommend, like send down damping. I will reduce the very high frequency, and then you can make boost frequency you want. You can boost at 2 kilohertz. Put it done with the reverb. So now we're gonna add our effect. So we're gonna start with saturator. This is gonna be like the distortion, a bit more gentle. Yeah, add a bit of bite still, but gentle compared to the amp one you're gonna see later. So we're gonna put in a hard curve mode. Things get already way much louder. So we're gonna map the dry wet amount, so this way we can control this. I'm gonna work at the maximum. Here I'm gonna add 2 dB of drive. Just make things louder. And then what I've done, I've played with the color here of saturator. This is something I like to do, especially with this type of metallic sound, quite aggressive. It usually works well. I'm not gonna lie, there is no like, I put this there because I wanted this or that. I just experiment until I found something I like. So about there. And yeah, we get a nice distortion. So I'm gonna put it down and I'm gonna add now the amp saturation. So this is really the crunchy saturation that's really gonna make it sound very industrial and distorted, obviously. First thing, put in dual mode to have the stereo. And then we're gonna put rock mode. Then it depends what you like the most. I like rock for this type of application. Lead heavy works well as well, but a bit too much to my taste, too much distortion. Rocks is the right balance, and I can kind of boost a little bit the middle and the presence. Again, we're gonna map this to amp drive. So this is great when you have a kind of a classic sound. This is kind of a classic triangle waveform, but you add just a bit of amp. And it's nice, but you see it's kind of missing a little bit of something. And now it's where tone is gonna add a bit more character. You can hear better this kind of vibrato, kind of phasing effect. And you can hear how with the reverb and the saturation, you can hear it way much more better. And it's subtle, but it adds such character. And that's a great way as well to use FM. You don't need to have a huge amount of FM to create this metallic sound. You can try to use it in a more gentle, subtle way, just to add this kind of slight modulation to your original basic sine wave or triangle in order to add a bit more character. So now that we have our sound, I'm gonna process it a little bit for two purposes. First one, like it's usually FM sound and very high. You remember, like I said, with the reverb, I was EQing the reverb. We're gonna do this as the overall sound to get rid of this very high frequency. So for that, I'm gonna use channel EQ, which is perfect for that. And we're gonna bring down the high from 3 dB, so it's gonna... It's just kind of soften the sound a little bit, and we can compensate kind of by boosting a little bit. So we're gonna put at 3 kilohertz. Usually it's a great frequency. 1, 3, 5, 8 kilohertz are great frequency to kind of boost. Maybe just 2 dBs. And you can just put the low cut, even though this one, if you work with bass, you might don't want to put it, but just make the sound a little bit more polished, a bit more pleasant to hear, even though it's a harsh sound, metallic, industrial sound. And finally, I'm gonna add drum bass. So this is not mandatory at all. This is something I like to use. It's just to compress everything, put everything in your face. So first things I will do, I will compress. Maybe reduce the input. Usually crunch add a bit of loudness, but here already we are pretty loud, so I'm not gonna go too crazy. But here again, you have a damping parameter that I'm gonna use to kind of tame a little bit this very harsh frequency. And I'm gonna use transient to slightly reduce the tail of the reverb. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So then after you have a variation, obviously, with the new Ableton Live 11 instrument rack. And then you can create all of your presets like I've done here on the original rack and try different. Different type of sound. So that's pretty much it. I hope you like this rack. As usual, it's available for free. The link in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe before to grab it. It's a great way to support me. Thank you very much for watching and see you soon, guys. Bye bye.